Shaped on terrifying stalker horror stories you won't believe. Story 1. The Night Watcher. It started with small things. Footsteps behind her in the quiet of the evening, a rustle in the bushes as she walked home. But when Emma saw the same dark figure, standing in the shadows of her street corner multiple nights in a row, she couldn't deny it any longer. She was being watched. Every evening after a long day at work, Emma would take the same route home. Yet, each night, the figure was there. Just a silhouette at first, but always getting closer. She began to feel the overwhelming sense of being followed, hearing her name whispered in the breeze, though no one was there. It wasn't until she received a text that read, "I've been watching you for days," that she realized just how close this stalker was. Terrified, Emma tried to contact the authorities, but every lead came up empty. The figure was too elusive, too skilled at staying in the shadows. One night, as she was walking home again, her phone buzzed. Another message, "Look up." When she did, she saw him, standing right above her on the balcony of her own apartment, staring down at her. He was always watching. And now, he was getting closer. Story 2. The Mirror. Manlena had always felt a strange pull toward old, abandoned places, so when she stumbled upon an old house near the edge of town, it felt like a hidden treasure. The house was run down, with boarded-up windows and peeling paint, but there was something about it that captivated her. She began visiting it regularly, fascinated by the eerie silence that surrounded it. One evening, she arrived to find the door ajar, as though inviting her in. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the floor creaked underfoot. As Lena explored the house, she came across an old mirror, cracked and covered in grime. When she wiped it clean, the reflection startled her. A man stood just behind her, staring directly into the mirror, but when she turned around, no one was there. At first, Lena thought it was her imagination, but as days went on, the incidents escalated. Each time she went back to the house, the reflection in the mirror grew clearer, the figure closer, until one day, the reflection wasn't just looking at her, it was smiling. A chill ran down her spine, and before she could turn away, the figure in the mirror stepped out. Lena ran, but she could hear the footsteps behind her as she fled the house. That was the last time she ever visited that place. The mirror man had been waiting for her, and now he followed her wherever she went. Story 3. The Dark Window. It was supposed to be a quiet, peaceful getaway. A cabin in the woods, far from the distractions of daily life. Rachel and her boyfriend Kyle rented the cabin for the weekend to unwind and escape the pressures of the city. But from the moment they arrived, something felt wrong. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by dense trees. At night, the darkness seemed to press in on them, thick and suffocating. It wasn't until the second night that Rachel noticed it. Across from their bedroom window, a shadowy figure stood just outside, barely visible through the glass. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light or perhaps a passing animal, but the figure didn't move. As Rachel's eyes adjusted, she realized it was a person, a man standing perfectly still, staring directly at her through the window. She nudged Kyle awake, but by the time he looked, the figure was gone. The next night, the figure returned, and this time, it was standing closer. Rachel felt a growing sense of dread as she realized the man knew they were watching him. He moved toward the window, his face slowly becoming visible as he pressed his nose to the glass, his breath fogging up the pain. She screamed, but when Kyle turned on the lights, the figure vanished. The following morning, they found the door to the cabin ajar, footprints in the mud outside leading directly to their window. Someone had been watching them, and they had been inside. Story 4. The call from unknown Jessica had recently moved to a new apartment in a bustling city, far from her small hometown. It was a fresh start, or so she thought. She settled in quickly, enjoying her new independence, until one evening, when her phone rang. The caller ID displayed unknown, but she answered anyway. "Hello?" she said, her voice tentative. Silence. Then a low whisper. I know you." Her heart stopped. She hung up immediately, brushing it off as a prank. But the calls didn't stop. They came every night at the same time, and each time the voice grew clearer. "I see you," it whispered. "You can't hide from me." Terrified, Jessica began to stay at friends' houses, but even then, the calls followed her. When she finally went to the police, they couldn't trace the calls. No number, no trace, just the chilling voice. It wasn't until she started noticing things out of place, her blinds slightly moved, her things shifted, that she realized the truth. The caller wasn't just on the phone. He was in her apartment watching her every move, and every night he got closer. Story 5. The Man in the Corner. When Ben moved into his new apartment, everything seemed perfect, spacious, affordable, and in a quiet neighborhood. But that changed one night when he woke up to the sound of his door creaking open. He froze, unsure if he was dreaming. Then, he saw him. A man stood in the far corner of his room, just staring at him. The man was tall, wearing a dark coat and hat, his features hidden in shadow. Ben's heart pounded as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Was it a burglar, or something worse? The man didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared, and Ben, paralyzed with fear, couldn't tear his eyes away. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally turned and walked out of the room without a sound. The next day, Ben searched his apartment, but nothing was disturbed. No evidence of a break-in, nothing missing. The only thing that remained was the chilling feeling that someone had been watching him. It happened again the next night, and the night after that. Every time Ben woke up, the man was there, standing in the corner. No matter what he did, the man wouldn't leave. Eventually, Ben moved out, but the sightings didn't stop. No matter where he went, he would wake up to find the man in the corner of his room watching him from the shadows. Story 6. The silent passenger Megan's commute home was usually uneventful, a time to unwind after a long day at work. But one evening, something changed. She got on her usual train, sat in her usual seat, and glanced around as the doors closed. Everything seemed normal, until she noticed the man sitting across from her. He was dressed in a dark coat, his face obscured by the collar, but what caught her attention were his eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto her. She shifted uncomfortably, trying to look away, but he didn't stop staring. As the train rattled along, the silence between them grew unbearable. Megan tried to focus on her phone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still watching her. When the train reached her stop, she quickly stood up to leave, but as she passed him, she caught a glimpse of his face. He was smiling, a wide, unnerving grin. The doors opened and she rushed off, heart pounding. The next day, she took the same train, and there he was again, watching her from across the car. His smile never wavered. Every day after that, he was there, silent, watching, waiting. Story 7. The Eyes in the Basement. Carla and her family had just moved into a beautiful old house on the outskirts of town. It was perfect, with plenty of space for their growing family. But there was something off about the basement. It was always cold, even in the summer, and the door creaked open whenever they passed by. One night, Carla went down to the basement to get some extra towels. As she stepped down the stairs, she felt it, a heavy, suffocating feeling. Then, she saw them. Eyes. Two glowing eyes staring at her from the shadows. They didn't blink, didn't move. They just watched. Carla screamed, running back up the stairs, but when she looked behind her, the eyes were gone. Over the next few weeks, the eyes appeared again, always when she was alone in the basement. No one else saw them, and every time she tried to explain it, her family dismissed it as her imagination. But then one night, the eyes followed her upstairs. They were waiting for her in her bedroom, glowing in the dark just inches from her face. The presence in the basement had never been a part of the house. It was something far older, something that had always been watching. These 7 stories aren't just figments of imagination. They are warnings. Whether it's someone watching from the shadows or an entity that never leaves, the horror of being stalked is something that haunts you long after the danger has passed.